Democrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to americasdemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Political moderate Jim Kessler, who has worked for prominent Democrats, says the party went wrong when it assumed it could win by relying only on minorities, millennials, and single women. Harvard Professor Theda Skocpol says much the same thing and advises Democrats to adopt a big tent approach to building Electoral College-proof majorities. And Bill Press talks with Elizabeth Wydra, head of the Constitutional Accountability Center. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Jim Kessler, the policy director for the centrist Third Way, says 70% of the so-called rising American electorate is not liberal. They're moderate, and the Democrats need to appeal to the two-thirds of Americans who are not doing well. And we say hello to Jim Kessler, Senior Vice President for Policy at Third Way, a centrist think tank in Washington. Jim Kessler, thanks very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure having you with us. You write about the fallacy of the rising American electorate of millennials, minorities, and single women that Democrats supposedly had under lock and key after Obama. Who screwed up that blueprint and how?
So first of all, that rising American electorate, millennials, minorities, and single women, those are very important constituency groups that need to be part of the Democratic coalition. And some of those groups are, particularly non-white voters, minority voters. Our problem was the belief that that was going to be enough to carry us over, and that we didn't need to both earn their vote, like we could take them for granted, that the most important thing about a voter is where they check the box on their census form, and we think it allowed Democrats to become complacent and take voters for granted. And the other is, I think it contributed to Democrats not appealing to folks that were outside of that coalition. Some married white voters, some downscale working class whites, and we needed more of those voters along with this rising American coalition.
Your organization has found that 70% of the so-called rising electorate actually call themselves moderate or conservative and not liberal. Do progressives and Democrats have to just give up their principles in order to win elections?
So when you actually do polling of the rising American electorate, of minorities and single women and millennial voters, and you ask them to identify their own ideology, they volunteer more often than not that they're moderates, and that many of them are conservatives as well. And among millennials in particular, in terms of party affiliation, they choose independent over Democrat or Republican. Progressives don't have to give up their principles, and Democrats, progressives have a huge role to play in the Democratic Party. But if you're going to row a boat, you can't row a boat with one oar. You need a progressive wing of the party. You need a moderate wing of the party to appeal to a wide swath of voters. The unfortunate fact of the electorate is, and it's been the same since they've been doing polling for decades, is there are 3 conservatives for every 2 liberals in the country, and then moderates kind of make up the middle group. So Republicans can run and win without winning the lion's share of moderate votes, but Democrats can't win unless they win, close to 60% of self-identified moderates.
Now, a question we and others have been asking a lot since November: how can people who are so afraid of the future vote for someone whose principles are anti-education, anti-science, anti-labor, anti-women, and anti-minority?
Well, so I think that there's definitely in this election a revolt against expertise. and whether that was expertise among scientists on climate change, or on how the economy was going to work, or how trade deals were going to work, or how Obamacare was going to work. There was a pushback among certain voters. You really saw that in the Republican Party primary, and it carried through in the general election as well. I think that in this election, the economy was clearly the most important factor. 1/3 of this country is doing well. It's not the 1% of the 99%. That's wrong. 1/3 of this country is doing well. They see globalization and technology as wind to their back. They see a future for themselves and their kids. They're in a professional class. 2/3 of the people in this country are either not doing well or fear that they won't be doing well soon. And they're not sure there's a place in this economy for their kids. So whether they're voting anti-education or anti-science or anti-labor, what they're really saying is, I'm not sure there's a place for me. I'm not sure there's a place for my kids. I'm not sure there's a place for my community in this new economy. And I'm willing to roll the dice with somebody like Donald Trump and with people who have views that are very different than the experts, because so far where the experts have taken me hasn't been to such a great place.
And we're speaking with Jim Kessler, Senior Vice President for Policy at Third Way, a centrist think tank in Washington. You point out that over 400 counties that voted for Obama at least once also voted for Trump. What's your conclusion from that?
A couple of conclusions from that. One is, there's this view about voters that they're static. If you voted this way in the past, you're going to vote this way in the future. And this way meaning the same way. And that is true until it changes. And what we saw is voters saying, okay, I've been coasting along, I've been voting this way, I've been feeling a little bit uneasy, and then they switched. So there's a lot of dynamism to voting out there, a lot more dynamism than some of the political experts have been saying. The other is, these 400 counties have something in common. If you look at them in the aggregate, yes, people have talked about their race. They are mostly white counties, that's for sure. But the median household incomes of these counties are generally, a good turn of the switch below the median household income in the nation. For example, in the 93 switcher counties in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, the median household incomes in those three states averaged about $8,000 below the median income for the rest of the state. These are places that are struggling, where the new economy has taken a detour past their county and has, worked for some other county, maybe more suburban, more professional class.
What is the political future of the 12 Democratic House members elected from districts that also voted for Trump, and the 23 Republicans elected from districts that went for Clinton?
So these are going to be interesting districts to watch, these 35 congressional districts. What we'll learn soon enough is whether the people who switched from Obama to Trump, whether they are Trump triers, I'm going to give this guy a try, or whether they're Trump voters. Like, is this a true realignment, or is this, I'm going to test the waters here? And and same thing for the 23 that moved more towards Hillary and now have a Republican member of Congress. So that's going to be the $64,000 question. Is this a realignment, or are people sticking their toe in the water? What we've seen in the last 6 election cycles, 5 of them, it's been a change election. At least one body of Congress changed hands, or the White House changed hands. So we might be continuing on this flip-flop, going back and forth. I think in these 12 counties, or these 12 congressional districts that are Trump districts with Democratic members, my hope is that the party learns from these districts and is able to appeal more to these, borderline Trump counties and Trump districts, while we're, maintaining kind of our newfound support in these more posh suburban areas. But it remains to be seen.
Can anything be done about the Electoral College, in which 37 million people in California were outvoted by 26 million people in 14 smaller states?
That is a stunning statistic. And it really, and we've had two elections, the last two elections in which, a Republican took office, the Democrat won the popular vote. This is one of the long-term changes that ought to be made. The Electoral College was really designed so that a couple of powerful states during post-colonial times could not elect a president, but there was never envisioned that the country would have 320 million people, 50 states. The popular vote should be enough. Whether that'll happen, look, everything is wrapped up in politics. I think if you asked people, if Americans could vote on this, the Electoral College would be gone in a heartbeat. But that would involve changing the Constitution, which means getting things through a Republican House. Don't see that happening. And getting it through state legislatures, which are now controlled by Republicans. I don't see that happening as well. But someday, I hope it happens. It's the right thing to do. It's an anachronism. It's time to move on from this. The Founding Fathers got a lot of things right. They got a couple of things wrong.
All right. Jim Kessler, Senior Vice President for Policy at Third Way, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Jim, thank you so much for your time. We do look forward to having you back again soon.
It is my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
This Social Security measure, I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Theda Skocpol has studied the Tea Party's success and says Democrats can't duplicate it unless they get people to actually vote. We'll talk to her about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
We're hearing a lot these days about House Speaker Paul Ryan's 123-page legislative plan for Trump Care, the GOP's so-called replacement for Obamacare. In fact, we now learn that it's actually a displacement plan. 24 million Americans who are now insured would no longer get coverage. The premiums paid by senior citizens would be jacked up, and the benefits for practically everyone would be cut. But Ryan did make sure that one group with special needs will benefit from his legislative wizardry: the CEOs of giant insurance corporations. Understandably, none of the GOP lawmakers who've been loudly crowing about killing Obamacare have mentioned a little 6-line proviso hidden on page 67, discreetly titled Remuneration from Certain Insurers. In plain English, this gob of gobbledygook offers a tax subsidy that encourages insurance conglomerates to increase the pay of their top executives. Current tax law says insurers can pay as much as they want to top executives, but they can only deduct $500,000 per executive from their corporate taxes. Under Ryan's ripoff, however, we taxpayers would at least double and possibly quadruple the unconscionable salary subsidies we dole out to these enormously profitable corporations. The White House and GOP Congress proclaim that their replacement of Obamacare is, quote, the will of the people. Really? How many Americans really think that jacking up the pay of super-rich insurance chiefs is a proper use of our tax dollars? And I'd say a big majority of the people would think it immoral to steal life-saving health care benefits from working-class and poor families just to subsidize corporate elites who are already overpaid. This is Jim Hightower saying, if Republicans actually think their executive pay subsidy is the will of the people, why are they keeping it a secret from the people?
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Professor Theda Skocpol warns that Democrats cannot stop the Republicans from radically changing America unless they can start winning elections. She has some ideas on how. And we say hello to Theda Skocpol, Victor S. Thomas Professor of Government and Sociology at Harvard University and Director of the Scholars Strategy Network. Her current research focuses on reorganizations on the right and left in U.S. national and cross-state politics. Theda Skocpol, thanks very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
It's my pleasure.
And always nice to have you with us. The cliche before the election was that demography equals destiny, that Democrats had enough millennials, minorities, and single women to dominate the political process. Isn't the issue less about demography and more about geography?
Well, that's what I think. I mean, it's partly a question of where your potential supporters happen to live, because like it or not, the United States is a decentralized political system with an electoral college where states and for that matter local districts within states are where the political contests are waged. So it's always been true throughout U.S. history that any kind of social force that's spread out over the geography has an extra edge in gaining power in state legislatures and in Congress, and for that matter in the presidency. So it helps certainly to have rising demographic forces on your side, and Democrats can hope that that's true, but we're in a period where actually there's a pretty even balance between demographic groups that tend toward conservatives and those that tend in a more liberal direction. And the conservatives tend to be more spread out, and they tend to vote more reliably.
It's clear that progressives are concentrated on the two coasts and are packed into congressional districts where their votes don't count as much as they would in, say, Nebraska. Do you think social media organizing from within the liberal bubble to people in red state America is a good solution?
Well, I think people who sympathize with the kinds of issues that liberals believe in and the kind of society that liberals want to build, to put it in a more value-oriented way, are spread all over the place. And many of them may not think of themselves as progressives or even Democrats. So it's not that there are people prepared to speak up and prepared to participate in a lot of places, but the most passionate and the most the ones that think of themselves as very liberal or progressive do tend to be packed into the big cities on the coast. And so that suggests a challenge that Democrats have to meet. They have to, on the one hand, speak to the passions of already convinced progressives, and at the same time find ways to talk about shared values, not just issues, but shared values, with people who might live in very different situations, work in different situations, and think of themselves politically in very different ways.
Is the Bernie Sanders model of organizing going to be successful for Democrats? Do they need to simply take over city and county Democratic organizations?
I guess I don't think that targeting the Democratic Party as a corrupt establishment, which is what a lot of Sanders supporters say, or concentrating all your energy on taking over Democratic Party committees is really the top priority at the moment. I have to say that, and I don't think I'm alone in believing this, I think the kind of arrival of a very unpredictable and semi-authoritarian president in the White House of the same party that controls both houses of Congress and has a very radical and unpopular economic agenda, I think that's a pretty scary moment in American democracy and government. And right now, a Big Tent approach for building a coalition to vote for Democrats as the only force that can put a stop to this is the top priority. Now, when we talk about the Bernie Sanders model, I'm skeptical what that is. On the one hand, Bernie Sanders in the primaries did a brilliant job of raising money from smaller contributors. Not really poor people, but kind of middle-class people who gave again and again out of their wages or salaries. And that's a good model. That's the Howard Dean model. That's the Barack Obama 2008 model. And I think Democrats would do well to try to build that model so they're not particularly dependent on courting large donors or really large donors. I don't think they should refuse money from large donors who are prepared to support what everybody else wants, but I don't think they should be so dependent on it. On the other hand, Bernie Sanders, during the primary campaign, mostly ran big rallies, and they were the biggest rallies in cities and in liberal academic centers, college towns. And that's certainly not good enough. And I'm not certain how much ongoing organizing has occurred. I think a lot of the people that are organizing now in the Indivisible movement and in the aftermath of the Women's March are not necessarily people who turned out for Bernie Sanders or voted for him.
And we're speaking with Theda Skocpol, Victor S. Thomas Professor of Government and Sociology at Harvard University and Director of the Scholars Strategy Network. Her current research focusing on reorganizations on the right and left in U.S. national and cross-state politics. Should progressives follow the Tea Party model and challenge incumbents in primary elections?
I don't think that should be the top priority in 2017 and 18. I'll be very frank with you. I think that unless Democrats start to be elected in surprising places or coming close in elections in surprising places in the heartlands of the country and away from the big cities, I don't think that there'll be much to stop the Republican juggernaut in Washington, D.C. from radically remaking American government. So at least for the next 2 years, I pretty much would encourage people to run for office. I think we need more Democrats in the pipeline, including passionate progressives. But when it comes to the general election, I think we should do what the Tea Party did, in fact, do back in 2010. It voted for whatever Republican was there.
Now, you were critical of Bernie Sanders. So who should the Democrats look to as a leader in the future?
Well, not one person. I mean, this is a moment for us to see quite a few flowers blooming. You know, in 2018, there are a number of vital governors' races across the country, and governors' races are good races for people to participate in. We could have lively primaries. That would be fine to see who will be the Democratic standard bearer, and look for someone who could articulate a strong economic message as well as a message of social inclusion, kind of putting together the themes that Clinton and Sanders articulated in different ways in 2016 in ways that fit their state, get them to speak to how they would have an economic development approach that would include non-big city areas along with other communities. And then let's see who emerges from all of that. There may very well be some successful gubernatorial governors, or there may be some successful senators. The time to decide on the 2020 nominee is after 2018.
You have said that procedural fixes in the political system, such as limiting the role of money or getting rid of gerrymandering, are not the answer for Democrats. Is anything the answer, or are they just going to go the way of Whigs?
Well, no, the answer is to organize and to vote and to get more people to vote. And in fact, you know, the one procedural thing that I think has to be number one for all the new local groups that are forming, yes, they're going to pursue substantive issues like fighting the cutting back on health insurance or demanding that Democrats and Republicans alike hold Donald Trump to account for his administration's corruption and excesses. But groups have to be thinking about voting. They have to learn the local rules for voter registration, get as many people signed up as possible, and get themselves and all their friends and associates motivated to turn out in special elections and in the 2018 elections. That has to be number one. That's the only procedural fix that matters right now. Getting money out of politics is really not a top concern at the moment, and it's not going to happen anyway. I mean, I just don't see any magic wand that can be waved to get big money out of politics. We should be getting organized people in. And as for gerrymandering reform, it's a good idea if and when Democrats are ever in control of states. But best research suggests that only half of the problem that Democrats face in translating their numbers into legislative seats is due to gerrymandering. The other half is due to the fact that Democrats right now tend to be too packed into big cities.
Theda Skocpol, Victor S. Thomas, Professor of Government and Sociology at Harvard University and Director of the Scholar Strategy Network, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Theda, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time and look forward to having you back again soon.
I've enjoyed it.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to keep the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, on the air, and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks with Elizabeth Wydra of the Constitutional Accountability Center on the nomination of Neil Gorsuch.
Forget health care, forget the Russian connection. Let's talk Supreme Court. Elizabeth Wydra here with us from the Constitutional Accountability Center. I saw a little story this morning somewhere when I was prepping for the show that some Democrats are talking about making a deal on Gorsuch with Mitch McConnell. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah? What's going on?
Look, I think that the 60-vote threshold is the right idea. It's what we've had in the past. It suggests that a judge is someone who can attract bipartisan support through his merit or her merit and his or her record. And therefore, that's why you can get 60 votes to get on the Supreme Court. We're talking about the Supreme Court. That's important.
Right.
Every seat is important. So this whole idea that you make a deal so you can do something in the next seat,
So the deal would be, as I understand it, all right, you need 8 of us. We'll give you 8 votes to get Gorsuch on the provision that you do not change the 60-vote threshold. So the idea we could stop you on the next one.
Right. So presumably, right now, this current nominee is replacing Justice Scalia, who is obviously in the conservative majority of the Roberts Court. The concern is if there is someone from the more liberal wing of the Supreme Court, whether it's Justice Kennedy, Justice Breyer, Justice Ginsburg retiring, and then the replacement, if Trump replaces that justice, that will really make a huge impact on the court. And so some people are legitimately concerned about that future scenario. But I would say that every seat is important. Also, I'm a Supreme Court lawyer, not a political strategist, but Mitch McConnell, given what he did to Judge Garland, who should have been Justice Garland, I don't know that I'd be willing to make a deal with Mitch McConnell. I've heard that too, but I think that, this is a fight worth having on Judge Gorsuch and taking him as the nominee as he is and determining on him whether you want to vote for or against.
You lost me.
I totally agree.
You lost me when you said make a deal with Mitch McConnell.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. Yeah.
That's a non-starter. Don't make a deal with Mitch McConnell. What are you doing? You can't do that. No. We know how that ends.
No, I mean, and particularly as you point, I mean, yeah, we saw that, and would try, I believe, to try to make that deal. So they're going to need. Let's assume there's no deal, right? They're going to need 8 Democratic votes based on the merits of Neil Gorsuch and and his testimony in front of the Judiciary Committee. And will he get the votes? What's your read today? Yeah,
I think after yesterday, I think some people who, for example, Senator Coons said that he was coming in with an open mind. There's some periods in which he felt like he got some answers, but there are other times when he definitely seemed frustrated that he wasn't getting answers. Someone like Senator Blumenthal, I thought at the end was basically saying, you didn't answer our questions.
Right.
And so the question is, how do those perhaps more moderate Democrats who are in...
Yeah, you're ahead of me. I was thinking of the floor vote, but because I just assumed he would get out of judiciary.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
He'll get out of judiciary,
yes,
right?
That was just a numbers game.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Republicans have enough votes. It could be a straight party vote. I doubt it, but it could be.
Right. And so the question is those Democrats who are, from red states, how they will feel about his performance at the hearing. And I think that still remains to be seen. I think we'll look at the witnesses today, and a lot of people, myself included, are come in with questions, remain skeptical, but are not going to make any final decision until after the hearings are complete.
Right. And then the American people, have a chance to weigh in too with letters and calls and phone calls.
Absolutely.
So I mean, I don't know how I think he has a good chance of getting confirmed, but I don't think it's for certain at all.
Oh, I don't either. Yeah.
He's got the 8 votes is going to be hard to add up. We could come up with the names of 3 or 4 probably right now, and we'd be right about them, but that's not.
And I think, honestly, if he'd been more willing to be more forthright about these fundamental protections like that, the fundamental protection in Roe, I think he'd be a lot further down on that list to getting to 8. But the fact that he didn't, I think, is very troubling.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Jim Kessler, Theda Skocpol, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.